Reflections. Transforming the Mind, Part 3, Spiritual Formation and Our Feelings. Excerpts from Renovation of the Heart by Dallas Willard. For the kingdom of God is not eating and drinking, but righteousness and peace and joy in the Holy Spirit. Romans 14:17. Those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. Galatians 5:24. Feelings are a primary blessing and a primary problem for human life. We cannot live without them, and we can hardly live with them. Hence they are also central for spiritual formation in the Christian tradition. In the restoration of the individual to God, feelings too must be renovated, old ones removed in many cases, or at least thoroughly modified, and new ones installed, or at least heightened into a new prominence.
Nature endows us at birth with three general patterns of emotional response. Rage is the response to the primary stimulus of thought, something interfering with our behavior or actions. Fear is the response to loud noises or loss of support. And the emotional response to love is usually the result of a show of affection or favors. And these seem to be the emotions with which we start life. Then as we grow up, many everyday things and social situations become associated with these primary stimuli, partly by a process called conditioning.
Our first inquiry as we greet people for the day is likely to be, "How are you feeling today?" Rarely will it be, "How are you thinking?" Feelings live on the front row of our lives like unruly children clamoring for attention. They presume on their justification in being whatever they are, unlike a thought, which by nature is open to challenge and invites the question, why? The term feeling indicates a kind of contact, a touch that is at once blind and powerful, in allure as well as in revulsion. A touching scene is one that evokes feelings, that touches us. In feelings, we really know that something is there, and solidly so. But what it is and why it is remains obscure, though hauntingly present. This aspect of blind power has famously led to the description of emotions as human bondage. But the quality of blind power equally extends to mere sensations or desires, which, as well as emotions, can be simply overwhelming. The attraction of feeling to human minds is so great that we project it into angels. One of the most common themes found in literary and artistic portrayals of angels is how they desire to feel what human beings feel, and mainly, what they are capable of feeling because they have fleshly bodies. Of course, the idea is angels would have to irreversibly give up their angel status to have what they thus desire, and as the stories go, they sometimes do give it up. In the movie City of Angels, Nicolas Cage's character actually does make the switch. Asked if it was worth it, he replies,
"I would rather have had one breath of her hair, one kiss of her mouth, one touch of her hand, than an eternity without it. One."
When you only lightly reflect on what is involved, both the blindness and power associated with such feelings become obvious. Really now, one breath? One kiss? For an eternity of what? The movie closes with him frolicking in the surf at sunset, and the landscape full of angels watching him with either envy or pleasure, at his pleasure. The theology, or angelology, is pretty weak, but the story correctly conveys the idolatry of feeling that characterizes the human outlook. Now, one thing quickly becomes clear when you think about the power of feeling. No one can succeed in mastering feelings in his or her life who tries to simply take them head on and resist or redirect them by willpower in the moment of choice. To adopt that strategy is to radically misunderstand how life and the human will work, or, more likely, it is to have actually decided, deep down, to lose the battle and give in. This is one of the major areas of self-deception in the human heart. The very giving in can be among the most exhilarating feelings known to man, though it can also be one of complete despair and defeat. Those who continue to be mastered by their feelings, whether it is anger, fear, sexual attraction, desire for food or for looking good, the residues of woundedness, or whatever, are typically persons who in their heart of hearts believe that their feelings must be satisfied. They have long chosen the strategy of selectively resisting their feelings instead of that of not having them, of simply changing or replacing them. Of course, this is just another way of describing the ruined person, the one who makes himself God in his world. To such persons, the idea that they should not honor their feelings is an insult. Their God is their belly, it will be recalled. They are enslaved to their feelings, hence human bondage, and have no place to stand in dealing with them. Jesus was referring to this situation when he said that everyone who commits sin is the slave of sin, John 8:34. By contrast, the person who happily lets God be God does have a place to stand in dealing with feelings, even in extreme cases such as despair over loved ones, or excruciating pain, or voluptuous pleasure. They have the resources to do what they don't want to do, and to not do what they want. They know and deeply accept the fact that their feelings, of whatever kind, do not have to be fulfilled. They spend little time grieving over non-fulfillment. And with respect to feelings that are inherently injurious and wrong, their strategy is not one of resisting them in the moment of choice, but of living in such a way that they do not have such feelings at all, or at least do not have them in a degree that makes it hard to decide against them when appropriate. Those who let God be God get off the conveyor belt of emotion and desire when it first starts to move toward the buzzsaw of sin. They do not wait until it is moving so fast they cannot get off of it. Their aim is not to avoid sin, but to avoid temptation, the inclination to sin. They plan their path accordingly. If we look at this from the viewpoint of one still at an early stage of spiritual formation, it is a major step forward just to sincerely desire, not to not sin, but to have different feelings, feelings that lead away from sin. At that early stage, one has to strongly want to not want what one now wants, and to want what one does not now want. One has to feel strong revulsion toward the wrong feeling one now has, or is likely to have, and at the same time strong attraction to good feeling that one does not now feel. This proves to be absolutely necessary in order to put off the old person, involving the wrong feeling, and put on the new person, involving the good feeling. So, for example, one does not merely want to not assault others verbally, or to not fall into fornication, but he or she really wants to not have the feelings that lead to it, and takes steps to avoid those feelings. If a strong and compelling vision of myself as one who is simply free from intense vanity, or desire for wealth or for sexual indulgence can possess me, then I am in a position to desire to not have the desires I now have, and then means can be effectively sought to that end. But achieving this new vision of oneself, of who one would be, must not be presumed to be a mere snap of the fingers. It will require genuine openness to radical change in oneself, careful and creative instruction, and abundant supplies of divine grace. For most people, all of this only comes to them after they hit bottom and discover the total hopelessness of being who they are. Most people cannot envision who they would be without the fears, angers, lusts, power ploys, and woundedness with which they have lived so long. They identify with their habit-worn feelings. When Jesus said to the man by the pool of Bethesda, waiting for the angel to stir the water, "Wilt thou be made whole?" he was not just passing the time of day, John 5:6. We are not told how old he was, but this man had been in his impotent condition for 38 years. If made whole, he would have to deal with a career change of immense proportions. To all his relatives and acquaintances, he would no longer be the one whom we take to the pool every day to wait for the angel. He would now be, what? Who? How would he identify himself? How would he now relate to others and they to him? He might even have to get a job. Doing what? But really, this man's problem was nothing compared to an individual undergoing the transformation of his feelings, emotions, sensations, desires, from those he learned in the home, school, and playground, as he grew up to those that characterize the inner being of Jesus Christ. He is now not to be one who will spend hours fantasizing sensual indulgence or revenge, or who will try to dominate or injure others in attitude, word, or deed. He will not repay evil for evil, push for push, blow for blow, taunt for taunt, hatred for hatred, contempt for contempt. He will not be always on the hunt to satisfy his lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. 1 John 2:16. No wonder he has no real idea of who he will be, and he must content himself with the mere identity, apprentice of Jesus. That is the starting point from which his new identity will emerge, and it is in fact powerful enough to bear the load. We must look still more closely at feeling. Feeling encompasses a range of things that are felt, specifically sensations, desires, and emotions. We feel warm, hungry, and itch, or fearful. Feelings include dizziness and thirst, sleepiness and weariness, sexual interest and desire, pain and pleasure, loneliness and homesickness, anger and jealousy, but also comfort and satisfaction, a sense of power and accomplishment, curiosity and intellectual gratifications, compassion for others, and the enjoyment of beauty, a sense of honor, and delight in God. Aesthetic experiences of art and beauty, personal relations, and actions all involve feeling and, moreover, require that the feeling be somehow right. There is no complete list of human feelings, and it would be a formidable task to define what feeling is. We have not attempted that here and need not concern ourselves with it. A familiar range of feelings frames our day-to-day existence, and we know a lot about these feelings and how important they are to our lives and to how we act and relate to one another. We know, for example, that feelings move us and that we enjoy being moved. They give us a sense of being alive. Without feeling, we have no interest in things, no inclination to action. To lose interest in life means we have to carry on by mere exertions of will or by waiting for things to happen. That is a condition to be dreaded, and it cannot be sustained for long. That is why so many people become dependent upon substances and activities that give them feeling, even if the dependence badly harms them and those near them. Such a condition is also the frequent background of suicide. So feeling is essential to life. We must accept this and work with it. And you can be sure that harmful feeling associated with evil, arising from it or producing it, will eventually be taken by a human being as better than no feeling at all. Healthy feelings, properly ordered among themselves, are essential to a good life. So if we are to be formed in Christ-likeness, we must take good care of our feelings and not just let them happen. The one known as the Good Samaritan, in the story by Jesus, Luke 10:30-37, was distinguished from the priest and the Levite by the fact that when he saw him, the wounded man, he felt compassion. Verse 33. This feeling of compassion is what led him to help the man and be a neighbor to him. Verses 36 and 37. Did the priest and the Levite then have no feelings? Of course not. They had feelings all right. Feelings of disdain, perhaps, or of fear for the harm that might come to them if they became involved, or a feeling of urgency as they remembered the business awaiting them at the end of their journey, which, being their own business, moved them more than did the need of this unfortunate man to be helped out of his mortally dangerous situation. They had feelings that motivated them to selfish action, and they hardened their hearts to any other feelings of sympathy and concern for the half-dead man that might have competed for their attention. Many of the feelings that animate us are destructive of others and ourselves. Jesus' younger brother James pointedly asked, "What is the source of quarrels and conflicts among you? Is not the source your pleasures that wage war in your members? You lust and do not have, so you commit murder. And you are envious and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel." James 4:1 and 2. And elsewhere he points out that where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there is disorder and every evil thing. James 3:16. This goes far to explain what happens in many homes, churches, and other social groups. But the need is to remove the cause, the underlying feelings, and not just the effect, the conflict, which, if denied or suppressed without removal of the feelings, will only break out again. The Old Testament book of Proverbs is full of wise sayings about the good and evil of feelings in human life. As we have already seen, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, 9:10. Moreover, hatred stirs up strife, but love covers all transgressions, 10:12. When pride comes, then comes dishonor, 11:2. Anxiety in the heart of a man weighs it down, 12:25. A cheerful heart has a continual feast, 15:15. A joyful heart is good medicine, but a broken spirit dries up the bones, 17:22. He who loves pleasure will become a poor man. He who loves wine and oil will not become rich, 21:17. The reward of humility and the fear of the Lord are riches, honor, and life, 22:4. The heavy drinker and the glutton will come to poverty, and drowsiness will clothe a man with rags, 23:21. The fear of man brings a snare, but he who trusts in the Lord will be exalted, 29:25. And so forth. It is part of divine and human wisdom to realize that feelings are central to our existence and to make sure they are good feelings. And indeed, they can be strong, healthy ones. We do not have to be victimized by destructive feelings. Even the feelings that harm us are, for the most part, not bad in themselves, but are somehow not properly limited or subordinated. They are out of order. Feelings are, with a few exceptions, good servants, but they are disastrous masters. Now, if we have destructive feelings, and everyone does sometimes, we should not deny that we have them or try to repress them, though we also should not, normally, dump them on others by acting them out. In any case, let it be very clear that we are not in favor of denying feelings or repressing them. That is not the answer to our problem. The proper course of action is to replace destructive feelings with others that are good, or to subordinate them, anger and sexual desire, for example, in a way that makes them constructive and transforms their effects. The process of spiritual formation in Christ will do this by grace, effectively and intelligently received and put into constant practice. Several other points about feelings must be considered before we come to deal with particular feelings, emotions, sensations, desires, and what can be done for their transformation into Christ-likeness. Most of the conditions we commonly speak of as feelings are really not feelings at all, but the feeling tones or sensations that accompany those conditions are so powerful that the conditions themselves become identified with the associated sensations. This is true of love and hatred or contempt, for example, but also with hurry and peace, and with self-esteem and discouragement. Now, there are some extremely serious dangers here. When we confuse the condition with the accompanying feeling, peace, for example, with the feeling of peacefulness, we very likely will try to manage the feelings and disregard or deny the reality of the conditions. That way lie such things as falling in love with love and most of the well-known addictions. The person who primarily wants the feeling of being loved or being in love will be incapable of sustaining loving relationships, whether with God or with other humans. And the person who wants the feeling of peacefulness will be unable to do the things that make for peace, especially doing what is right and confronting evil. So, as far as our planning for spiritual formation is concerned, we must choose and act with regard to the condition, good or bad, and allow the feelings to take care of themselves, as they certainly will. In particular, we must never directly cherish, protect, or manipulate feelings, whether in ourselves or others. The only exception to this rule is when negative feelings have themselves become so overwhelming that they threaten to take over our lives. Then we must take steps to remove the negative feeling, grief or pain, for example.
I don't think he's gonna stop. Come on!
Prayer or even medication for such feelings is then wise. But even so, the focus on the feeling must not be allowed to prevent our dealing, when and as we can, with the conditions from which that feeling arises. Much of the great power of feelings over life derives not just from the fact that they touch us, move us, but from the fact that they creep over into other areas of our life. They pervade, they change the overall tone of our life and our world. They spread like an unstable dye, or a viral form, or a yeast. They may take over all else in us, even that to which they have no relevance. Things and people around us then look different, take on a distinctive tone or meaning, and that can even determine the tendency and outcome of our life as a whole. This explains why it is so hard to reason with some people. Their very mind has been taken over by one or more feelings, and is made to defend and serve those feelings at all costs.
It's sort of like what you're doing right now, where a woman is a woman.
Mm-hmm. Well, because you're seeking what we would call in my field of work an essentialist definition of gender. I think it sounds like you would like me to give you a set of biological or cultural characteristics that are associated with one gender or the other.
I'm not seeking any type of definition, I'm just seeking a definition.
Yeah, and I gave you one.
Well, can't reason with crazy.
It is a fearful condition from which some people never escape. We have noted how thoughts generate feelings. If we allow certain negative thoughts to obsess us, then their associated feelings can enslave and blind us. That is, take over our ability to think and perceive. Here, for example, is a woman, it could just as well have been a man, who has taken in the thought that she has been treated unfairly for years in her marriage and her job. Rather than sensibly addressing the circumstances or just turning her mind away from this thought, she receives it and broods over it for years, developing a tremendous sense of injustice and outrage, which she also welcomes and cultivates with the aid of sympathetic friends. This root of bitterness, Hebrews 12:15, gradually spreads over her whole personality, seeping deeply into her body and her soul. It becomes something you can see in her bodily motions and actions, and hear oozing through the language she uses. It affects her capacity to see what is actually going on around her, to realize what she is actually doing, and to think thoroughly and consistently. She is in what Bob Mumford has called the prison of resentment, though she thinks she is perhaps for the first time acting freely. Beyond the individual level, poisonous emotions and sensations often take over entire social groups, blinding them and impelling them on terrible courses of destruction. This is nearly always what has happened in cases where repression of ethnic groups or genocide occurs. Thus, to the onlooker, the participants, Nazis, and so on, seem to be deaf, blind, and insane, which, in a sense, they are. They, too, are imprisoned. Feelings can be successfully reasoned with, can be corrected by reality, only in those, whether oneself or others, who have the habit and are given the grace of listening to reason even when they are expressing violent feelings or are in the grip of them. A feeling of sufficient strength may blot out all else, and will invariably do so in one who has not trained himself or herself, or been trained to identify to be critical of, and to have some distance from his or her own feelings. Combined with a sense of righteousness, strong feeling becomes impervious to fact and reason. Once Oliver Cromwell, sitting in the midst of his bickering brethren, blurted out these wise words, "I beseech ye, brethren, by the bowels of Christ, believe ye may be wrong." One's feeling of righteousness does not mean he is right, and actually should alert him to be very cautious and humble. Those who are wise will, accordingly, never allow themselves, if they can help it, to get in a position where they feel too deeply about any human matter. They will never willingly choose to allow feeling to govern them. They will carefully keep the pathway open to the house of reason and go there regularly to listen. This certainly is an offensive proposal to modern sensibilities, with its emphasis on spontaneity and enjoying the rush or the buzz of feeling. Abandonment to feeling, allowing oneself to be carried away by feeling, is actually sought by many, and on a regular basis. That is a testimony to our epidemic deadness of soul. People want to feel, and to feel strongly, and in the very nature of life they need to do so. The opposite of peace is really not war, but deadness. The dead soul is one waiting to explode or fall apart, and one that will seek out trouble for reasons it cannot understand. In its desolate life away from God, there is no drama to provide constructive feeling tones that would keep life from being a burden. Such persons really have no hope. This is the key to those lives of quiet desperation Thoreau attributed to most men. Feeling will then be sought for its own sake, and satisfaction in feeling alone always in turn demands stronger feeling. It cannot limit itself.
1, 2, 3, 4.
This simple point is what explains the powerful grip of addiction, including the various forms of sexual perversion or addiction to praise. Addiction is a feeling phenomenon. The addict is one who, in one way or another, has given in to feeling of one kind or another, and has placed it in the position of ultimate value in his or her life. Of course, addicts may also hold other things to be very valuable, and their life may be, usually will be, torn and even tragic because of conflicts. But they nevertheless have inwardly conceded the final word to some feeling, emotion, sensation, or desire. It may be that they have come to fear or even hate that feeling, and that in their present condition their mind is blinded and they see no way out. At this point, suicide sometimes occurs, but in their heart of hearts, they have accepted the rule of the feeling and have conceded its right to satisfaction.